Good morning, everyone. Is everyone ready to get mindful? Very zen. Enjoyed this lecture. We're super excited for it. Hello, my name is Sierra Hoisington. I'm the Associate Executive Director. It's weird to say a new title now after so many years. We are, thank you. We are so excited to have all of you here at this wonderful lecture. As many of you know, we just debuted our very first Wellness Week, so Holly's lecture goes hand in hand with what we're talking about, and everyone has been made way more aware of during the pandemic, so we're so happy to bring this to Ding. We are the nonprofit fundraising arm of the Jay and Ding Darling National Wildlife Refuge, so we fill in the gaps where federal funding falls short, and as a lot of you probably know, that happens quite often. So we have a wonderful video that explains kind of what we do and the areas that we support, and I know we have lots of generous supporters in our area here today, so thank you, and please enjoy this video.
The Jay and Ding Darling National Wildlife Refuge of today isn't here by chance. In the early 1940s, Jay Norwood Darling, for whom the refuge is now named, was instrumental in the effort to block the sale of environmentally valuable land to developers. Ultimately, at his urging, President Harry S. Truman signed an executive order creating this refuge in 1945. In 1982, the Ding Darling Wildlife Society, Friends of the Refuge, began. Its purpose was to educate visitors about the importance of protecting lands, waters, and wildlife. In 1999, this group of volunteers stepped up to lead the building of the refuge's Visitor and Education Center. This was the first partnership of its kind, where a Friends group raised money to construct a federal building. And it is still the hub of the refuge today. Why was this necessary? And what is the Society's role today? Well, over the decades, the refuge budget has been cut 60%, and it has half the staff it formerly did. Meanwhile, visitors have increased 66% to nearly 1 million people annually. The refuge cannot meet their growing needs alone. So the Ding Darling Wildlife Society works to fill in the gaps where federal funding falls short. Most importantly, the refuge keeps Ding Darling's spirit alive by educating generation after generation about the importance of conservation, so visitors from around the world will take that knowledge back to the communities where they live. Today, with the help of generous donors, the Society supports the refuge in these primary areas: land acquisition and restoration, advocacy, conservation education, wildlife protection, biology and water quality research, and internships.
What really draws people to Sanibel and the core objective of people is to come and enjoy the Jay and Ding Darling National Wildlife Refuge. I think Ding Darling would just be ecstatic over the fact that there are people that are carrying on his legacy. I mean, he obviously gave from his pocketbook, gave from his heart, but he would be ever so gratified to know that that legacy that he started continues today.
The best legacies are not what you do for yourself today, but what you do for the next generation.
I wanted to be at the refuge because there were things that I could do here. Every time I come to volunteer, I see the important work that's being done by the Ding Darling Wildlife Society. I see the smile on children's faces and families who are enjoying nature and wildlife. It is so wonderful, it really is, to know that all of this work will be protected for the next generation because of the work that the Society has accomplished. Because if we don't do it, who will? Who's going to do it?
To that end, the Ding Darling Wildlife Society is dedicated to ensuring that Ding's legacy lives on at the JN Ding Darling National Wildlife Refuge. We invite you to join us and our thousands of members in supporting the refuge for generations to come.
Okay, so yeah, that's just a little snippet of what we do, and I know a lot of you know a lot more about what we do. For example, these free lectures, and we also have our film series kicking off next week. And like last year, it will be virtual. You can sign up through our e-newsletter, Ding on the Wing, which Bertie pointed out already. But if you are not signed up for that e-newsletter, please do. There's a sign-up sheet in the back. And like we said, we like to support different areas, and we are very much trying to be a lot more inclusive of what nature means to a lot of people. And for some, it's a way that they find peace, and in Holly's lecture, we'll learn a little bit more about that as well. And if you are interested, her books are for sale outside, and she will be signing afterwards. So I will go ahead and introduce Holly. All right, Holly Merker. Our sponsors today are an anonymous donor and Joe and Michelle Blonda. Holly Merker is an avid birder, educator, writer, lecturer, and cancer survivor who credits Ornitherapy in helping her save her life. Holly has been in the state coordinator for eBird in Pennsylvania since 2005, has been a birding instructor and guide for many years, and has worked for the National Audubon's Hog Island Camp, American Birding Association, and Red Knot Outfitters Birding Guides. Wow, that was a lot, Holly. You have accomplished quite a lot. She co-owns the ID Boot Camp, an intensive bird ID program with an ID guide author, Richard Crossley, who spoke to us last week. She is a volunteer at Hawk Mountain, served on the board of the Pennsylvania Society for Ornithology, the Delaware Ornithological Society, Delaware Valley Ornithological Club, and is a founding member and co-chair of the Frontiers in Ornithology. I keep wanting to say Ornitherapy, so I keep tongue twisting that as well. So, a symposium for youth. Holly has a background in art therapy, but employs birds and nature to achieve the same result for mental, physical, and emotional wellness. She is passionate about connecting the next generation to birds and nature, and fostering conservation leaders through youth development and birding programs. She is lead author on the book she is speaking about today, Ornitherapy, For Your Mind, Body, and Soul, which guides readers into deeper connections to the birds around them. Holly believes that anyone can benefit from Ornitherapy if they're open to it, and she's made it her life's mission to share wellness through birding. Please join me in welcoming Holly Merker.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much, Sierra and April, for welcoming me this morning, and Bertie, and everybody else here. I just truly feel honored to be here at Ding Darling National Wildlife Refuge. This place is very special to me for many different reasons. One of them is that I used to bring my kids here when they were much younger to experience wildlife in the outdoors. And I truly feel like not only is it a refuge for wildlife, but it's also a refuge for people. And I'm sure many of you can attest to that as well, because we all enjoy watching birds. But is there something more in it for us beyond just the enjoyment? Well, I certainly think so, because ornitherapy and birds themselves, I believe, help save my life. And perhaps it can save yours too. I'll share more about my story in a few minutes, but the fact is that we all need birds and nature for our own overall well-being. And Hippocrates said thousands of years ago that nature itself is the best physician. But what's happened to that? Are we still using nature in its most powerful way to power our wellness? The fact is that it all starts right outside our own door. So how many of you during the pandemic felt comfort and peace by birds that came into your yards or gardens? Yeah, that's what I figured. Most hands are in the air right now. Yeah, during the pandemic, we became aware of the power of birds. We couldn't have our families in to visit us for the holidays or special events or even dinner parties. But what we could do is bring the birds in closer. And by inviting them in with native plants and by bird feeders and bird baths, we're able to find new visitors, new companions, feathered friends to keep us comforted and help us, take a little bit of the edge off of that feeling of isolation that I know I for sure felt during the lockdowns in particular, but throughout this pandemic. And many people have found the joy of birds during this time. So for me, I think this is one of the upsides of the pandemic is how many more people started to take time to slow down enough to realize what was going on in the natural world right outside their own doors. Exciting. And by focusing on quality of experiences versus the quantity. So what I mean by that is just saying, you don't have to go far. You can even just look out a window to find awe and appreciation in nature, particularly with birds. You don't have to go on far-flung trips to rack up thousands of birds on a life list in order to reap these benefits. While that's a lot of fun, the birds right outside our own doors offers us so much. So, I'm talking about ornitherapy, birds, but the research that's coming out right now suggests that nature itself is a powerful healer. And I know Dr. Joe Blanda spoke to many of you in this audience about this very same concept of nature as a healer. And the studies that are emerging more and more, there are now probably over 1,000 different papers that are strongly supporting the findings that the therapeutic value of being out in nature can have significant impact on our overall wellness. But why birds? Well, birds are charismatic megafauna, and they offer us gateways into deeper experiences with nature. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service back in 2016 did a study of North American, and I believe United States specifically, how many people consider themselves birders or bird watchers. Now, this could mean anything from watching birds right outside your own window or going on trips to see birds, actively going out, like, say, to Ding Darling to look at birds. The numbers in 2016, and this is before the pandemic, were 46 million Americans considered themselves bird watchers, okay? That's a big number, right? Okay, 26, that was years ago, and some 86 million, I believe, of the statistics of people who consider themselves wildlife watchers. So we know that when we translate some of these numbers, about 18% of Americans already watch birds. But do we recognize the value that this practice can have in our overall well-being? Well, this is this message of ornitherapy. Because birds are everywhere, wherever you go, and wherever you are. And by seeking out birds, taking in each moment, we're rewarded with benefits to our mind, body, and soul. And this is ornitherapy. So what's going on here? What makes birds so interesting? Well, okay, how many of you in the audience have found yourself watching a bird and being completely captivated in the moment by that bird? Yeah, that's what I figured. Almost all hands are up. Yes, because birds provide us that distraction that allow us to take time out of our busy lives. I mean, I think we can all attest, no matter what our life is about, to the pressures and pulls we feel and face in this modern society, right? I mean, we're digitally driven, we're digitally distracted. Some of us feel in constant demand by our cell phones or emails or whatever. We're constantly feeling the need to attend. And really our brains are not driven to do this all the time. We're doing a pretty good job of all this multitasking, but we need to give our minds a break in order to recharge our batteries. And when we take a step out into the natural world, a different area of our brain is tapped into. So studies show that when we're doing something very intense, like working on emails or working on our phone and we're analyzing or whatever, one area of our brain is activated. If we step outside into nature, automatically a different part of our brain turns on, and the other is given a little break. Now this is good because you're giving your mind, that part of your brain, an active little nap, let's just say, okay? And we all could use a little nap sometimes, especially when we're undergoing a lot of stress. When we're undergoing a lot of stress, we often get into these ruts of negative thinking patterns. We can't get something off of our mind. This is something psychologists call rumination. But studies suggest that if you give your mind a break by walking outdoors and absorbing and being immersed in the natural world, not only is your mind given a vacation, but you're able to tap into a different part of your brain. So that when you come back to what you were doing before, you're going to have a little bit more of a new perspective and a different mindset. And this is a positive distraction, a break we can all use. And it's simple, it's free, and it's right outside our own doors. One of the best things about being in nature is that it offers this experience of not having any judgment. I'll explain a little bit more about what I mean there, but birds in nature are available for all people to experience and enjoy. And nature and birds don't care if you're having your worst day and maybe you're having a bad hair day, or in my case, a no hair day. And I needed to have nature to help me feel grounded and be who I am and not somebody that's being judged. And no matter what your age, you can experience nature and these benefits. And a lot of people don't even realize they're actually practicing this ornitherapy because birds captivate our attention and provide us connections to the natural world. And there is no place better than here at Ding Darling to experience birds and nature and just going out on the wildlife drive or taking a walk and watching the people here and how they're interacting and engaging and watching. It is the greatest show on earth, both for people and for the natural world. Absolutely fantastic. And this is not a new concept of using birds and or nature to provide us something beyond just the enjoyment as part of our well-being. In fact, this word ornitherapy that we chose for the title of our book is not a new word. We didn't coin that phrase. Actually, the word I could first find used in the British Journal of Medicine in 1979 by Dr. A.F. Cox, a doctor in London. And he decided to do a little experiment because he was noticing that a lot of his most despondent patients were were having side effects from medications he was putting them on for depression and anxiety. So instead, he was a bird watcher, he loved birds, so instead he decided to prescribe bird watching. And what he noticed is that as a tranquilizer, bird watching may be as effective as any drug, but cheaper and safer than many. So bird watching as a tranquilizer, something to calm, to soothe, to take the edge off of stress and anxiety. I don't know about you, but I often find myself in need of that edge, and it's been, birds can be extremely therapeutic. Of course, probably all of you might recognize this spectacular bird, the swallowtail kite, which will soon be gracing the skies here in South Florida. The fact is that we all need ornitherapy, and if we allow birds and nature to slow us down, we are self-medicating with healthy doses of ornitherapy. And nature, this word refuge that we were talking about earlier, refuge for people. Finding refuge in nature with birds. Well, what's happening here? Biochemically, when we step outside and into nature, chemical responses explode inside of our bodies. Cortisol, you may know about cortisol, is a hormone. And when it's flipped into overdrive for prolonged periods of time, when we're stressed out, we're anxious, we're worried, it starts to impact our ability to function with optimal wellness. So studies show that going out into nature, immersing yourself for just 20 minutes and up to 40 minutes, but at 20 minutes, studies show that your cortisol levels start to decrease. And the longer you can spend in nature, the more impact on lowering your cortisol levels. Now, what's so important about that? Well, here's the thing. If our cortisol levels are activated and high for a long period of time, it's going to impact our immune system. So we will be less resistant to fighting disease. And during the pandemic, obviously we knew that that was super important. Did you all notice how many people were flocking to national parks and wildlife refuges during the pandemic? I mean, some of them had to shut down because they could not handle the capacity of how many people were connecting to nature. And that's because we are animals. And as animals and a part of nature, instinctively, whether we recognize this or not, our brains were telling us, get outside. Not only was it a safe place during the pandemic, but it was also a place that we could find this refuge. Here is a place in Pennsylvania that I spend a lot of time, Hawk Mountain Sanctuary. And one of my roles there is to be a hawk counter. And what I do is census the migratory birds flying over during the fall migration. This is a place where people can visit. I encourage you to visit there if you're ever in the southeastern Pennsylvania region during fall and any time of year really. But one day last fall, back in September, I was sitting up on the rocks there doing my census, and a gentleman came up. He was a visitor, and he said to me, excuse me, ma'am. And I could see he was like really anxious about something. And I looked over and I said, sure, what's up? And he said, I just need to tell you in advance because I don't want to scare you, but I need to scream at the top of my lungs from the mountaintop. Blank you, COVID-19. I'm not using the words he used, but you can fill in the blanks yourself. And I was a little surprised because, this is not something visitors at Hawk Mountain or anywhere normally say. And he said, wait, I need to explain myself. And he said, I'm an ICU doctor in New Jersey. This is my first day off in many, many weeks. I have had it with this pandemic. I can't take it anymore. My staff is overworked, overstressed, overtired. We can't get any time off. I know some doctors that have died, and every day I'm making life and death decisions about, right now, back in September, very young patients. And it's killing my spirit and my soul, and I just need to scream at the top of my lungs. Normally I wouldn't allow somebody to do that because this is a sanctuary and a quiet space, but I understood, I could feel his pain. And I thanked him for his service in what he was doing to help people live, quite honestly. He sat down on the rocks right in front of the what we call the counters pit, that space behind that fence there. And as he sat there, he got a little distracted by some of the birds that were flying over, and he goes, hey, tell me about what you're doing. So I explained the significance of why we measure and monitor raptor populations and why Hawk Mountain Sanctuary or the Appalachian Trail Ridge here was a significant part of the thread of their migratory journey, which can be thousands of miles for some of these birds. I could see as he sat there longer that his body, his demeanor changed. He became relaxed. He almost melted into the rocks. And he never did have to stand up and scream at the top of his lungs. And that's because nature was a refuge for him. And this is the power of the natural world. This idea of using nature to heal or to promote overall wellness is not something new. And in Japan, they started this forest bathing or Shinrin-yoku. Has anyone ever heard of that before? Forest bathing or forest therapy? Yeah. So this was started in the 1980s when in Japan, people were, particularly in Tokyo, feeling the pressures and pulls of digital life, modern life, and people were overstressed, overworked, and becoming burned out. They were not as effective as workers as they had been. So they adopted this concept of taking a walk in the woods. And when they did that, they could see their people's demeanors change. It was therapeutic. It was providing them that respite from their hectic lives that they so needed. A temporary vacation, right? But also what science and research started to learn is that when people are in these ecosystems, the plants benefit us because certain plants have chemical compounds called phytoncides. Now, phytoncides in a plant's life are used to help it provide defense against insect pests, like termites, things like that, but also from decay. So a live plant will utilize the effects of this chemical compound phytoncides. But we've learned that phytoncides actually have a benefit to us as well in protecting our immune system, because phytoncides, when we experience them, activate killer cells in our immune system called natural killer cells. And these actually are known to target cancer cells. So if it means that going out and taking a walk in a natural ecosystem in a forested landscape can help us prevent cancer, well, sign me right up, right? Who else wants to sign up for that? Because it's free and easy, right? Free and easy. Now, in the United Kingdom, doctors are actively prescribing nature as a frontline defense against things like heart disease, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and also, again, stress, anxiety. In the UK, they have a different health system, and their health system is generated by the government, right? So it's in their best interest to keep people off medication. But also physicians know, just like Dr. A.F. Cox, who coined the word, or used the word ornitherapy, that those medications often come with complicating side effects that may be impactful on how people live. So using nature, and particularly birds, so I have to say the Royal Society for Protection of Birds is endorsing this program. Why? For the same reason I'm talking about this here right now, is that we know that people are attracted to birds, that 46 million Americans love watching birds, but why are we not using this concept here? Why are we not embracing using nature as prescriptive medicine? What's really exciting here in the last week, I learned, and probably some of you saw this too, is that in Canada, where also this concept of prescriptive nature is taking place, they are actively partnering with the national parks. And doctors are going to start prescribing nature in partnership with the national parks to get people outdoors, because we know nature is good for us. Now, whereas our healthcare system is very different here in the US, and we don't have a national healthcare system, I believe this can be a grassroots effort. So if birds in nature make you feel good and you see these benefits that are positive in your life, share that with your doctor. The more doctors that hear this message, that people like you and I are benefiting from these experiences by going to Ding Darling and having, being out in nature and connecting to the natural world and birds in particular, the more doctors that hear this message, the more efficacy it's going to provide for this concept, because we are living proof of people who benefit. And they'll be able to share that with their other patients. In fact, my own GP, I shared this with her, the book I authored, and also this concept. And she asked for my permission. She said, this is fantastic, because during the pandemic, she's had so many people coming into her office and unexpectedly breaking down crying because they had so many changes in their life, so they felt isolated or whatever. And she was looking for things to tell them to do. They weren't people that she would put on medication, but she wanted to help them. Yeah, the suggestion of getting outdoors, connecting to nature, being out and watching birds, bringing birds closer, was powerful to her. Now, studies are supporting this more and more, and the University of Exeter, also in the United Kingdom, in 2017, published a report alongside that with support from the British Trust for Ornithology and also the University of Queensland in Australia. This report suggested that people living in areas with more birds are less likely to suffer from stress, depression, and anxiety. The best part is these people did not have to know anything at all to about birds at all. They didn't have to be bird identifiers like near you. They didn't even have to notice the sounds around them, but they would still benefit. So I say, why aren't realtors putting a disclaimer on every house they sell that is in a bio-rich environment? If you buy this property, you will be healthier and happier. Research that does it. True, why not, right? I mean, this is absolutely true, and we should all be promoting healthy, rich, biodiverse ecosystems with lots of insects, lots of plants, and the birds that come and visit. Really, truly, this concept of ornitherapy is a conservation initiative. It's just wrapped in a different package than we're used to hearing. Because the more people that recognize that birds and nature are truly good for us, the more people are going to want to take care of it, right? And ornitherapy benefits our hearts. I like to say birds are heart healthy. Forget about that oatmeal box with the big heart on it and it says this is heart healthy. Birds are heart healthy. Why? Because we love them, they fill our hearts with joy, but also because we lower our heart rate when we start connecting with them. Remember that study, 20 minutes is all it takes. In fact, this year, 2022, I have a personal challenge to myself for my wellness. In addition to trying to maintain my personal fitness and good sleep and healthy diet, I'm also doing 22 minutes for the year 2022 for birds and wellness, taking 22 minutes a day to go outside and connect to birds. Because we know these benefits help to decrease the adrenaline, stress responses, and increase production of blood cells that promote good health of our vascular system. So truly, birds are heart healthy. But they also benefit our minds by decreasing anxiety, lowering our stress and cortisol, like I said, 20 to 40 minutes, reduces those negative thinking patterns like I was talking about before by resetting our minds, recharging our batteries. Also, how many of you think bird identification is easy? I know I don't. I can't learn enough. And it's absolutely fascinating. Even the most common birds, you can learn something new. And even experts like Richard Crossley, who was here last week, will tell you that he doesn't know enough about, say, the northern cardinal, a bird he's probably seen millions of times in his life, right? Okay, so all those brain games that we download on our tablets or laptops or phones, forget about that. Go bird watching. It's going to provide you the same amount of mental challenge and benefit. Also, it is proven that research suggests that being out in nature and connecting to birds helps improve our cognition and improve our concentration and increase our productivity and creativity. So I think every corporate center in the U.S. should have a natural area right outside, and also encourage people to get outside and take a nature or ornitherapy break during the day, because the return of that simple investment will have measurable effects on the productivity of their workers and also creativity level. Think about this. 40 and 50 and more years ago, people would leave their offices to go take a smoke break. Now, part of that was a nicotine addiction, but part of it also is that people needed to get outdoors and just take a break, right? And you see people standing around outside buildings, taking breaks. And, we can all benefit from simple things, like just stepping right outside our own doors. Also, this concept of connecting to birds and nature can help us promote recovery, a speedy recovery from mental and physical health issues. And birdsong is music to our ears, and the biochemical changes that occur inside of our bodies can have measurable effects. So, when we listen to music that we like, studies show that dopamine, and that's a chemical messenger that facilitates the feeling of pleasure. Dopamine is released when we listen to music we like. So it makes perfect sense that when we listen to birdsong that we love in natural soundscapes in nature, dopamine is also releasing. So let's give that a little try. I'm going to play the song of this beautiful wood thrush. How many of you recognize this bird? So this is a bird of eastern forest, which makes one of the most beautiful sounds. Does anybody recognize that from their backyard in spring? So this bird is spending its winter in, down in the tropics, but will be returning in early spring. So what's going on here? Well, in 2020, Cal Poly published a study that suggests that avian sounds boosted people's sense of overall well-being. So what they did was they had two study groups, Group A and Group B. They both went on the same hike through a natural area, but for Group A, they put speakers around and infused the hike with artificial birdsong. Now the hikers had no clue what was going on. They did not notice, they had no idea what was going on. They just knew that they were to take a hike. And for each study group, Group A and B, they did a survey afterwards to monitor people's, among other things, how they felt after they took that hike. And they saw marked increase for Group A in their overall sense of well-being after they took the walk with the birdsong. And they did this enough to suggest that this made an impact on how they were feeling, changed their mindset, right? Well, why is this happening? Well, the fact is, when birds sing, they feel safe. Now, this Carolina wren that was in my backyard was singing his heart out, as you can see right there. He's not going to do that if there's a Cooper's hawk nearby, is he? That's one of his predators. And when birds sing, as I was saying, they feel safe. As animals, whether we know it or not, our minds and brains recognize this and relax. Our minds can interpret the natural world, and our minds will start relaxing. And this creates an alert state of mind that feels calmed, relaxed. And studies are now showing, I saw a really fascinating study that said that if you want to learn something new, or if you're attempting to study for a test, while you're trying to learn, put on some bird song in the background. So you can find multiple like soundscapes in nature that offer just the bird song in a forest ecosystem by putting it into YouTube or Spotify or any of those sources that has repetitive and layered amounts of bird song. So it should be a layered amounts of bird song. What studies are showing is that when we listen to bird song while we're trying to concentrate, we retain up to 30% more of that information than if we weren't listening. Now that's impactful, right? I mean, that's pretty good, because all it is something in the background. Whether we know it or not, it is calming a rigorous course of chemotherapy for breast cancer. Unfortunately, I was diagnosed with breast cancer at the age of 32. It came out of the blue, and the timing couldn't have been worse, because 3 months earlier, well actually 6 months prior to that, or just shy of 6 months prior to that, my husband, who was a naval officer who was activated as a reservist, was sent over to Saudi Arabia immediately after September 11th occurred. Our family thought that that was going to be our hardest battle to wage through the next several months for what would have been a 5-month deployment over there when our country was in crisis. But shortly after the new year, I took my 2 boys, 5 and 7, sledding at their elementary school. And there's a little tiny hill there. And I was having a lot of fun with my boys and got on a little snow tube and ended up going over a teeny tiny little hill and coming down on my rear end and fracturing, basically crushing 2 of the vertebrae in my spine. So that meant that I was immobilized basically and was wearing a brace from the neck down. And 5 weeks after that happened, I was, shockingly to me, diagnosed with a very aggressive form of breast cancer. Those challenges that our family faced during that time were almost unsurmountable, the thought of them, how to get through. But I have to say that I felt lucky because I already had birds in my life. I've been somebody that loves nature and birds since the time I can remember. And I had no idea what a constant companion the birds would be for me during this journey. One of the hardest parts of going through this experience, outside of wondering every second of the day of whether or not I was going to survive, was losing my hair. I was a young mom. None of my friends were bald. My kids told me, my older son in particular, that me being bald was terrifying to him. And he was really struggling with this because it was a visible sign that mommy was sick. I had to make a promise to him that none of his friends would ever see me bald. That was important to him, that I didn't look different. So I lost all my hair one Saturday night. It kind of all came out at once. And I didn't know what to do with that hair. Because what do you do with hair when it all falls out at that age? It was devastating. I thought it was weird to throw it in the trash can. I also thought it was weird to save it, but I didn't know, and I didn't want to make a decision about it right then. So I stuffed it into a party bag and set it aside. That happened about 10 o'clock at night, so I went to bed shortly afterwards, newly bald. The next morning happened to be Mother's Day, mid-May. It was the height of spring migration in eastern Pennsylvania where I live, and I knew I was going to have a difficult time facing my family with my new look. Before they woke, I grabbed my binoculars and I went to one of my favorite places, which is a trail that lines the Brandywine Creek in the Brandywine Valley of southeastern Pennsylvania. I knew that there I could be me and who I was, that the birds weren't going to judge how I looked, that nature didn't care if I had no hair. While I was out walking that morning, I was surrounded by the beautiful soundtracks of all the newly arrived songbirds, like that wood thrush we just listened to. But also I was able to pick out the song of a cerulean warbler as he sang from high in a tulip poplar tree. And as I put my binoculars up and found him sitting there, I noticed that right behind him was a nest. And in that moment, a female cerulean parachuted out of that nest and flew off. And he inched his way closer to the nest, and he sat there singing. And in that moment, I lost my sense of self. I was experiencing awe. I was experiencing what is called mindful birding. I was truly living in the moment. And I realized that that bird was also living in the moment, that he wasn't worried about what caterpillar he might have missed as he flew over a tree, or where his next meal was going to be 5 hours from now, or maybe even whether or not he was going to survive. He was living in the moment, and his moment was about making sure that he and his mate had a successful brood of young. And that was no different than what I was trying to do, just trying to survive. After all, that cerulean warbler had just winged its way back thousands of miles from its wintering grounds in South America, with so many pressures that birds face as they move across our skies. And that bird gave me the will to survive. I was inspired by that bird and all the birds surrounding me and the journeys that they face, because I knew I'm no different than that cerulean warbler. I'm just another being on this planet, just trying to wing my way through. And I hoped that I could at least live long enough to see my boys grow up. And I was very lucky, because I did get to see my boys grow up. They're now 25 and 27, and wonderful young men. That's a photo of them in the middle there. But the birds, because I believed, helped save me. I am driven to help save them, and I've dedicated my life to bird conservation in any way by connecting other people to nature and bringing them these joys. Another way in which the birds inspired me and gave me hope to carry forward was, remember that hair I told you I didn't know what to do with? I took half of it and I put it into a suet cage outside my window, because I read that if you pull hair from a dog's hairbrush or something and put it out in spring, birds might be able to use that for nesting material to line their nest. You know, we are not exactly sure if it's to warm the eggs or help the insulation, or if it might be to ward off predators, because it's hair of a mammal, right? I can't tell you the delight, joy, and just sense of hope I felt when I saw a tufted titmouse pull strands of what my wasted hair away to repurpose that hair and to line its nest. Or at least I hope that's what it did. To me, the loss seemed less sad, less hurtful. And I felt okay about losing my hair, knowing that it was being repurposed for a new life. And that sense of hope that I was able to receive from the birds was a message. I'm just so lucky to be here today. And so I'm driven to share this concept of what it is to use birds as a distraction to provide deeper connections with nature, and this practice of mindful birding. So what is mindful birding? Well, it's very simple. It's an awareness that you're in the moment watching birds with the goal to allow yourself to slow down. You know, we need permission to slow down. It feels weird if we're not doing everything we should be doing and listening to, you know, the pressures and pulls and demands on our lives. Mindful birding also includes being intentional, an intention to turn our attention to birds while focusing on just being in the moment, right here and right now, and being without judgment of our experiences. You know, I'm a photographer, and I really enjoy taking photos, but sometimes I get really mad because I don't get the best picture of a bird. And sometimes I get really frustrated because I didn't get the best look at that hawk going over, so I can't make an identification. That's being judgmental of an experience with nature. If I would be much more calm if I just allow things to happen and the experience to be what it will be. And mindful birding is also an attitude that feeds our curiosity to keep asking questions, to keep learning, to keep understanding. Because the more we learn about birds and nature, the more we understand about ourselves. Sometimes I'm so stressed out, it's hard for me to decompress and actually practice mindful birding. So one tip I have is to, if you go outside, once you get yourself oriented and you feel you're in a place that you can do this, just close your eyes. When we close our eyes, it's like pulling the curtains down, and it taps into other areas of our brain, which allows us to absorb sounds and allows us to think differently. It takes that edge off the stress. So one of my co-authors of the book Ornitherapy is Sophie Crossley. And Sophie is 25 years old, and while she may not consider herself a birder or a bird watcher, she experiences nature and this concept of mindfulness through free diving, something that she is very good at. So Sophie, free diving is when you don't use like a tank, an oxygen tank, but I think she goes down over 100, I think she told me last week, 120 feet. And the longest period of time she stays underwater is about 4.5 minutes, I think, without taking a breath. How do you do that? I'm gonna let Sophie share her story.
When I free dive, my awareness expands from myself to the world around me. The feeling of water moving on my skin, oxygen filling my lungs, the pressure of the ocean hugging my body. In these moments, I notice so many beautiful details that are often lost above the surface. Mindfulness for me starts in the simple moments of everyday life. It doesn't have to be big, life-changing observations. It can start with little things, like noticing the leaves rustling in the wind, or a songbird landing on a branch, or even giving your full attention to this video. Your eyes and your body are here, but where is your mind? Here, right now, is where we should be. We can use anything as an anchor to the present moment. With Ornitherapy, we aspire to use our connection with birds and the natural world to bring us back to the right here and right now.
And this practice of ornitherapy, in addition to feeding our minds and our hearts and bodies, also benefits our souls, because watching birds is not only fun, and good for us. It's a spiritual experience for some. Here is Dr. Diane Cusick, a friend of mine who is the dean of the School of Natural and Health Sciences at Moravian University in Pennsylvania. And Diane is a climate scientist, a conservationist, and birder.
Psychologists have found that people that experience a sense of awe have psychological benefits from that particular experience. We know that time in nature, being around trees, can lower our blood pressure and stress levels. We know that soil bacteria can improve cognitive function. There are many, many benefits to being in nature. For me, a sense of awe comes from standing on the shores of Lake Superior, the vastness of the water, the space, the roar of the waves. Or it comes in the solitude that you gain from being in a old-growth forest. But it also comes from the birds. I'm in awe at all the diversity, the shapes, the forms, the behaviors, the adaptations, and the beauty of the music that they provide.
So Diane's talking about the sense of awe. And awe, there's mounting research that shows that awe, this experience of awe, motivates care and concern for others and diminishes our sense of self, which can motivate us to be more caring and helpful towards others. So it makes sense that if we experience awe in nature, we're going to want to take care of that nature, right? If it has those same effects. And awe in nature doesn't have to be something spectacular like a flyout of geese here at Bosque del Apache National Wildlife Refuge, or here at Ding Darling with the roseate spoonbills or the ibis that are in flight. It can be as simple as watching a bird right outside your own window. And this is Matt Young from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and Matt states that even the most simple experiences are a terrific intersection between what is conservation science and what is overall wellness. And these days, so many of us have felt completely isolated by circumstances, particularly driven by the pandemic. But sometimes people in their lives feel isolation in other ways. And this is my dad here. My dad was diagnosed with a form of dementia that presented itself in the loss of the ability to use words and language. It's called semantic dementia or primary progressive aphasia. This meant he was unable to communicate with language with his loved ones, his friends. But I noticed something different occurring with my dad in his relationship with nature and birds. I would find him often outside in his yard, and when he couldn't speak to us, he was out there whistling to the birds. And he was able to communicate with them, and I believe they were responding. And he felt comforted, I could tell, just by watching him. Here's his little clip of this. See if you can hear the tufted titmouse singing back to him. Oh, it's not loud. Unfortunately, the disease took my dad's life a couple years ago, but the fact is that he was able to connect to nature at a time when he needed it. In fact, I ended up selecting the memory care facility that he eventually had to go into because there were bird feeders outside the windows. And I was watching the residents there get so much benefit from having feathered friends come visit every day, when sometimes family members, particularly during the pandemic, were not allowed to come in. We can provide these opportunities for others, and it doesn't have to be somebody in such a crisis in their lives. It could be somebody that you know that maybe just can't get out as much. Maybe physically isn't able to even get outside, even past their own yards. And if you know people like that, introduce them to the pleasures and the wonders of the natural world, especially with birds, by bringing birds in closer for them. And have immeasurable benefits. And sometimes in life, we need something to help us keep afloat, and finding buoyancy. So negatives can sometimes be turned into positives, and I'm going to this is Alvaro Jaramillo, who is a well-recognized birder, author, and somebody who has a lot to share about birds. Alvaro will explain himself.
So, hi everyone, this is my Ornitherapy story. I'm Alvaro Jaramillo. I'm a full-time professional birder, right? So I have a company that does moving tourism. I write for magazines and books, and everything in my working life is about birds. And about 3 years ago, I had some weird symptoms at home, and I went on a trip, on a tour that I was leading in Bhutan, and had a really, I would call it a violent episode where I couldn't stand up. I got dizzy and so forth, and just was awful, and ended up losing all of my hearing from this probably viral infection that I didn't know about, and we never could figure it out. But lost all of my hearing in my left ear, and it was replaced with a ringing tinnitus, or tinnitus as some people call it, that kind of drives you crazy. Well, if you know about birding, you know that hearing fully and being able to locate sounds is one of the ways that you find birds. And suddenly, I couldn't do it. And I didn't know if I could continue actually doing all of the things I do for my work. And it turned out that I could, and I have, and I've shifted how I do things. I've incorporated other people. There's been a lot of positives that have come out of this awful situation. But the point here is that the reason I was able to get through it was the birds themselves. It's hard to explain, but when you don't have two ears, it's as if you hear in one dimension, two-dimensional. You cannot actually, your brain cannot differentiate what's important and what isn't important. Everything kind of sounds the same. And I would go to big places like, supermarket, and the sounds were shocking. I would get stressed. I would not, I felt really vulnerable when I was in anything public because of the way my brain couldn't process the sound in a way that made sense of it. But the only place where I felt normal and completely at ease and entirely like the guy I used to be was when I was watching birds. So I'd be outside and all of the natural sounds would function. I could hear it, I could understand. Maybe I couldn't spot exactly where that Savannah sparrow was singing, but it was where I could feel calm and really think about exactly the point is that the world is still happening. There's all this beauty that's going on, that I am still part of this amazing natural world. And that has been the single most important, not the only, the most important part in my healing from this crazy situation. Maybe by next year I'll have a cochlear implant or something else that's going to help me out. That's going to be cool. But if it wasn't for the birds, I don't think I would be doing this well with this crazy situation. So ironically, the birds help me to be a better birder and stay doing what I've always loved to do, which is watch birds and show people birds and enjoy birds with a community of bird people. So thank you, birds.
And I'm happy to report that he did get his cochlear implant much sooner than he expected. And sometimes birds help us heal our hearts.
Birding has been a passion of mine for over a decade now, as is photography. It wasn't until a recent tragedy in my life that I found myself in, I guess you could say, a different relationship with birds. 3 years ago, my 23-year-old son died very unexpectedly. Grieving his loss was a very dark path for some time, and as I slowly found the light again, I discovered something unexpected. Birds were revealing themselves to me in a way that ultimately played a part in healing of my heart. I now see birds, and aside from the mindfulness and beauty and joy that they bring, they also sometimes bring an amazing gift in the form of a reminder, or you could say a sign, for my son. Just a couple weekends ago, early on a Sunday morning, I headed out to a nearby lake where I bird on occasion, and I came upon 1,000 or so Canada geese. And shortly thereafter, I spotted what looked like 2 white geese and immediately pulled my binoculars to my eyes. It was a pair of almost angelic-looking Canada geese, both of very diffused white and light gray plumage. And as I took these stunning beauties in, I knew right away these were a gift or a sign. See, the anniversary of my son's death, which has been heavy on my heart and mind this month, was coming up in another week. So yet again, one of many signs I've experienced where birds gave me the gift of peace and comfort, the spirit of my son, and the continued healing of my heart.
And watching the most common birds can teach us something and be therapeutic, which is why myself and Richard and Sophie Crossley were driven to write this book, Ornitherapy. It's not a book about the benefits. It's a book about how to guide yourself into deeper experiences with birds through guided explorations. Because we often forget that we are nature, as Andy Goldsworthy, the British artist, said. Nature is not something separate from us. So when we say that we've lost our connection to nature, we've lost our connection to ourselves. Because the more we look at birds and the more we understand them, the more we understand ourselves, and the happier and healthier we'll be. Because watching birds brings us joy, but there's so much more in it for us, mind, body, and soul. And so my question to you is, have birds impacted your life? If they have, spread the word. Thank you so much for allowing me to share this message of Ornitherapy. And thank you to the Ding Darling Wildlife Society for having me and inviting me into your space today.
Big thank you to Holly Merker. I think we've all kind of been thinking, I know I was thinking in the back, my connection to nature and how special that is, and I'm sure we can all relate on different levels and alike and different, and I think that's super special, especially with this pandemic still looming and all around us, and I think it's something we continue with for years to come. We don't have any time for questions right now, but Holly will be signing books outside. You can buy her book as well. She can answer any questions there, but thank you so much for coming and supporting us, and we hope you have a fabulous day.